Hello, I am Carrie Rapaport,
And I am Gheuens.
and today we are presenting the paper we wrote for the Voynich 2022 conference. Our research focuses on the Voynich imagery, and we're going to be discussing a recurring motif that connects multiple sections of the manuscript.
Researchers often focus on one section or even one folio, but it can be useful to look at a wider picture. Each section clearly has its own character, but there are some recurring themes as well. Some obvious examples are, of course, plants, stars, and a peculiar type of nude female figures.
In this presentation, we will have a closer look at another, perhaps less familiar, recurring theme throughout the Voynich, canopies. For now, we will define canopies in the broadest sense of the word as any kind of suspended covering. The use of canopies in different contexts is more extensive than what we could cover in one paper, so we selected two groups of examples with shared features that connect several sections. The first group contains three structures from Choir 13. These are clearly recognizable as canopies, since they are suspended above the nymphs' heads and drawn from a side perspective that implies a three-dimensional round shape. The third example is tilted to the side, but they all share a similar composition. Straight lines radiate from a central point, which is topped by a finial. The wedge-shaped sections can be a single color or alternating stripes. A and B are bordered by a single undulating line with a band of small parallel lines underneath, while C is bordered with scallops.
For the second group, we selected two ranels from the rosettes fold-out and the central elements of two diagrams from the cosmological and astronomical sections. First, they share some remarkable features with each other: a jagged circumference, asterisks covering half their surface, and wedge-shaped sections in alternating colors. Three examples have ruffled edges. All four examples are also surrounded by sections of text that alternate with lines, and these connect to an outer ring. Unique features include doubled lines in the bottom rosette that connect to the edge, with a number of wider intervals that have been likened to knots. Some also split in three. The central elements reveal how each section uses its canopies in its own way. In the rosettes fold-out, the central elements are architectural. We recognize a finial in the top rosette, in the same style as those in Choir 13, and the bottom rosette contains something resembling an ornamental projection found at the intersection of roof vaulting. The cosmological diagrams, on the other hand, have celestial bodies at their center.
These are similar structures used in different contexts. They are placed in and adapted to different environments. The rosettes fold-out, whatever it may be, attaches more undeniably architectural details to these figures, but these correspond to the position of celestial bodies with faces in the cosmological diagrams. We argue that the Choir 13 examples are the same kinds of structures adapted to yet another context and drawn from a different spatial perspective. Since the structures must coexist in the same three-dimensional space as the human figures, we see both figures and canopies drawn from a side view, proportional to each other in the scene. But much of the structure is the same: a round object with a finial in the middle, wedges in alternating colors, and an irregular edge. We believe that while their context is different, all of these structures are related. Their similarities and their unique features, in combination with each other, all point to one specific source of inspiration. If we focus on their common aspects, a clear set of features emerges. The thing we are looking for is round. It may have ruffled edges, be topped with a finial, and have bands of alternating colors. It may be decorated with motifs like stars, undulating lines, and scallops. While each of these features on their own may be found in a variety of different contexts, there is one specific source that combines all of them together. This is the medieval parasol-roofed tent.
In the Middle Ages, tents looked much different from those we are used to today. They were widely utilized in a variety of contexts, from military camps to elaborate portable palaces in court society. We will now discuss some typical features of medieval tents and compare them to the Voynich canopies.
This manuscript provides a particularly informative example of how tents were built. First, a canopy was placed upon a central pole. This canopy was then stabilized on all sides by guy ropes, which were in turn attached to the ground with pegs, keeping the fabric under tension. The ends of the ropes were often split in 2, 3, or more parts, a practice called crow-footing. This provided a more even distribution of tension. Manuscript miniatures often reduce the number of guy ropes or omit them altogether because they quickly crowd a scene, but the most accurate representations do include them. Finally, the cloth walls are suspended from the roof. These images show how the walls hung from the roof and fastened to the ground with ropes and pegs. The roof is typically topped with a finial. Medieval tents are essentially fabric structures that are held under tension by ropes. There are several indications that the Voynich canopies may be made of cloth. This example has an irregular wavy pattern on the edge that is interrupted in the middle, and the points in these waves connect to longer lines that trail down into the green-colored area below. The way the lines connect to the pointed edges is reminiscent of guy ropes pulling on tent fabric, but here the pattern is not uniform. But if the ropes were not pulled taut, the fabric edges would buckle and warp irregularly. This may explain the irregularities in the Voynich canopy if the longer lines represent loose guy ropes. Intriguingly, a bit further below this canopy, a figure holds something resembling a peg. Different meanings have been suggested for this object, but we are not aware of other interpretations that take into account its proximity to these elements resembling a loose fabric canopy. Furthermore, this canopy is very similar in structure to the one on folio 79V, except for its irregular section in the middle. This raises the question of whether these may be similar tent canopies in different states of tension. The four selected examples from the rosettes fold-out and the cosmological diagrams also have straight lines that connect to each point, forming a star-like shape. This is the same shape of tent canopies stretched under tension, except this is what they would look like if seen from directly above or below. It is also possible that a tent's roof could already be shaped in such a way. Details in the bottom rosette may also depict crow-footed guy ropes that split into three.
Three examples with delicately ruffled edges also suggest a textile material. This kind of edge pattern is found in 15th century depictions of rich clothing, indicating a lace trimming or decorative slashing of the fabric's edge, known as dagging. Both the Virgo and female Gemini figures from the Voynich zodiac section wear blue dresses with dagged sleeves. These ruffled edges appear more often in images of clothing than in canopies, but examples do exist. This illustration also highlights the common ornamental band with semicircular scallops. The canopy of folio 78R is tucked away in the top corner of the page, but if we rotate it to place a finial in an upright orientation, it becomes especially clear how the top canopy part is inspired by medieval tents. Additionally, the edges of tent fabric were often embellished with fringe or tassels. Bands of small parallel lines beneath some canopies correspond to the spot where fringe is found on tent roofs. One might object that some of these features we have been discussing are also found in other types of structures. In this image, for example, the tents and a stone tower are topped with the same kind of finial, so finials by themselves are not enough to determine which kind of structure the artist most likely had in mind. On their own, any of the features we have mentioned could be associated with other structures, or with purely decorative motifs, but together they make up a visual vocabulary specific to medieval tent canopies.
We also examined common decorative features. Alternating stripes of color is a particularly common trend in tent canopy decoration. There is a long tradition of heavenly symbols like stars embellishing canopies, often expressed in medieval architecture on church ceilings. However, the top Voynich rosette has stars on the same surface that carries a finial, making it unlikely that this depicts an interior view of a church ceiling as seen from below. Therefore, this must be a top-down view of a canopy with stars on the exterior, something that would be more likely found on tent canopies. Manuscript illuminations show tents decorated with stars both inside and outside. In addition to reflecting real decorative trends, there appears to be a symbolic aspect in these examples. On the bottom left, we see a depiction of the Old Testament tabernacle, the portable earthly dwelling place of God, and on the bottom right, stars embellish a royal tent, highlighting the divine right of kings. Stars play multiple roles in this image of God and an angel holding Christ as the man of sorrows. They fill the night sky above a divine canopy, in addition to embellishing the outside of the canopy itself, and covering a fabric backdrop inside that also evokes the sky and heaven. In these situations where stars are used both decoratively and symbolically in medieval art, asterisks are usually the preferred form. Another celestial decoration on tents is rays that surround the finial. This feature gained popularity in the later 15th century, but examples from the early 15th century exist as well. The specific origins of this design are unclear, and it may have originally had symbolic significance. but it appears frequently on tent canopies in different contexts, which suggests its use became primarily decorative. The Voynich diagrams with canopy-like elements and rayed celestial bodies at their center would thus coincide with the emergence of this decorative trend. A final motif worth noting is an undulating line running horizontally across tent canopies. This 15th century Alsatian manuscript is reminiscent of the way similar lines border canopies in Choir 13. But the most significant source of examples is the Wenceslas Bible, where 19 folios depicting scenes from the Old Testament contain tents decorated with these undulating lines. The Voynich and the Wenceslas Bible also uniquely share a layering of specific patterns within the same canopy structures. It is notable that the Wenceslas predates the Voynich by just a few decades and was created in Prague, where the Voynich first appears in historical records several centuries later. We must also consider the metaphorical implications of the wavy line motif. Within the same manuscripts where we found the motif on tent canopies, a similar line also indicates clouds that symbolize the border between the earthly and the heavenly realm. This meaning was widely linked with the motif, particularly in the early 15th century. As these examples show, the multiple uses of this wavy line as stylized clouds or fabric decoration is not an isolated case. It appears that the Voynich artist is also aware of its dual meaning, since the motif is used in multiple contexts that have both celestial and tensile connections. The Voynich goes even further to suggest some deliberate ambiguity between these two realms. Clouds, sun rays, stars, and other celestial bodies are all part of the canopies. Therefore, we will argue that the Voynich consciously sustains a visual metaphor likening the sky to a tensile structure made of fabric. This same conclusion can be reached by comparing 3 examples where the wavy line is paired with a band of parallel lines. On the left, this is most clearly a canopy. It is even topped by a finial. But in the detail top right, the human figure is now positioned above the wavy line, placing her in the heavenly realm. Bottom right, the line appears to do double duty, positioning the creature above the clouds, while simultaneously forming a canopy for the human figure directly underneath. The placement of the band of parallel lines also adds to the ambiguity. When it appears beneath a canopy, it corresponds to the location of fringe, but it also may appear beneath a band of clouds. In this context, it has been associated with rain, as shown in an Italian manuscript of the early 15th century. The text explains that this is Juno, the goddess of clouds, sprinkling rain on the fields. In addition to representing rain, parallel lines may represent light when they radiate from beneath a band of clouds, as in the Wenceslas Bible. The sky imagery in both cases combines these same 2 motifs that are also found on canopies.
In the Middle Ages, the idea of the sky being made of fabric would have been readily recognized as a biblical metaphor. This was expressed in manuscript illuminations like this example of the sky as a fabric veil that is lifted to reveal God's presence. And other biblical metaphors specifically liken the sky to a tent. In Isaiah 40, God is said to have stretched out the heavens like a tent. And Psalm 19 refers to a tent pitched in the heavens for the sun. The association of tents with the divine revelation is firmly rooted in the Old Testament, where tents contain the physical presence of the divine on earth. In Exodus, Moses builds the tent of meeting. Whenever he enters it to speak with God, divine clouds cover the tent. Notice that this tent is also decorated with a wavy line motif, juxtaposed with divine clouds. Given this background, it makes sense that the tents in the Old Testament scenes of the Wenceslas Bible so extensively use stylized bands of clouds as decoration. In the biblical context, tents, clouds, and the divine realm are closely connected. The Voynich does not contain overt biblical narratives, but we believe that its imagery is inspired by the same kind of metaphors. It even goes much further in exploiting ambiguities between celestial and tensile elements.
We don't believe that the Voynich artist tries to depict literal tents like those in other manuscripts. We can identify a distinct combination of tensile elements, yet there is more ambiguity, and an overall emphasis on the canopy specifically, not the walls. As we have noted before, manuscript artists would omit some structural parts of tents for pragmatic reasons, but we propose that the Voynich artist has a different motivation. The overhead part of the canopy and other elements like guy ropes that stretch this canopy are particularly associated with the symbolic aspects of tents. This would be consistent with the biblical metaphors that evoke a horizontal, stretched out expanse, seen by God from above and by humanity from below. We also propose that such thoughts inspired the Voynich artist to attempt unusual top-down or bottom-up perspectives of tent canopies in the rosettes and the celestial diagrams. A top-down viewpoint is relatively rare in medieval illuminations. Architectural elements in maps are often drawn from a side view. But in the contexts where we do find this perspective, a specific theme is present. They depict sacred architecture. One example is this illumination by Hildegard of Bingen that represents the city of God from a visionary viewpoint that imagines a heavenly perspective. Closely related are depictions of heavenly Jerusalem in many apocalypse cycles, such as those from the Beatus tradition. These represent the holy city that descends from heaven at the end of times, as described in Revelation 21. In the biblical description, an angel transports John to a great and high mountain, which explains why this subject is repeatedly depicted in an overhead view in order to convey the city as John saw it. The plan of the city is often viewed from directly above, while individual architectural items like towers and gates are seen from the side. Unlike other maps, though, the Beatus tradition arranges the heavenly city in a flattened, radiating layout, which emphasizes its symmetry and specific architectural features. Something similar is happening in the top rosette, where the whole canopy is seen from directly above, but the finial is depicted in a side view that does not match the overall perspective. Even though these depictions of New Jerusalem do not include tent canopies, we believe that their uncommon perspective, connected with the theme of a unification of the earthly and the heavenly, is relevant to understanding the Voynich images. The architecture of medieval cathedrals may also give us insight into the unusual perspectives of tent canopies in the Voynich. It has long been established that their lofty, luminous domes and vaults are meant to remind the viewer of heavenly Jerusalem, because the earthly church was seen as the physical embodiment of its heavenly counterpart. Some art historians even suggest that ribbed church domes also resemble luxurious tent canopies as seen from directly below. Like the Jerusalem temple, medieval cathedrals are seen as the direct successors of the tabernacle, the tent that housed God's earthly presence in the desert. Some of the best visual parallels for the bottom rosette are found in ceilings of medieval buildings. These ceilings are blue, peppered with stars, and similarly shaped to the bottom rosette. The circular boss in the middle of the rosette, where the top rosette has a finial, may indicate that we are looking up towards the ceiling now, rather than down at the roof. Yet, despite the close resemblance between the bottom rosette and stone church ceilings, parts of this specific rosette have been most strongly linked to tents before, like the crow-footed guy ropes. The Voynich canopies, tent symbolism, and cathedral domes are all united by the metaphor of a textile sky, a vast tent spread by God. These meanings are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they reinforce and confirm each other and show how the Voynich artist consciously and skillfully layered related concepts together, creating a meaningful visual metaphor based on traditions rooted in Scripture.
There are several implications to our findings. Firstly, we demonstrated that the Voynich artist took inspiration from typical medieval parasol roof tents. Second, canopies are found in different sections of the manuscript. Together with a number of other recurring features, this suggests a stronger connection between the manuscript sections than what may be expected at first glance. This is reinforced by our third and most important point. All canopies we discussed have been explicitly constructed to convey a visual metaphor, likening the sky to a tensile structure. In Quire 13, the most ambiguous motifs were chosen to draw these sky canopies, a wavy line that could be seen as both clouds and rippling cloth, attached to a band of parallel lines that could be rain, light, or fabric fringe. In the celestial diagrams, the canopies are integrated in schematic representations of the heavens, and the same canopy that holds a sun as its center here gets an architectural finial in the rosettes fold-out. Throughout the Voynich canopies, the color palette is mostly blue with yellows and whites, just like the sky. And then again, the omnipresent alternatingly colored sections points to a common scheme in tent construction, and asterisks are exactly the type of star that most frequently decorated tent canopies and church ceilings. There are still many aspects left unexplored, such as how the other types of Voynich canopies that we were not able to discuss may fit into this larger scheme. Additionally, further research into specific worldviews underlying these images should provide us with a greater insight into the cultural background of the Voynich manuscript's makers.